Thank you for doing this. Would you mind just telling us your first name?
Yeah, my first name is Musa.
Can you tell us a little bit about your childhood?
Okay. Yeah, so I'm born in Pakistan. I was born in 1991 uh, in the region of Punjab. So my ethnicity is kind of Punjabi from Pakistan. It used to be one country before the partition between India and Pakistan. Uh, I grew up in a joint family system. So my dad's brothers, and my grandparents used to live. We all used to live together in one house, around 15 people when we were growing up. So I would say my childhood is I was not just brought up by my parents, but by my uncles, my aunts. So it was a very close upbringing by everyone, both when it comes to learning from people and also when getting scolded. So it was like anyone can take care of you as a parent growing up. I did my schooling in Pakistan as well until I was in grade 11. And when I was in grade 11, that's when my parents decided that they wanted a different future for me and my sister, as I understand now in hindsight. And they decided to move to Canada. So we immigrated to Canada. I think the first time we went was in 2003, just to, I guess at that time it was just to see how the country is when we were moving, and we had to go there anyways to get all the documentation. I think that part, I don't remember it that well, but I was in grade 7, completely moving into a new country. But it was tough moving into a very different culture than where I was. So in Pakistan, we grew up in a third tier city. So it was not the top cities that everyone knows about in the country. So it was culturally extremely different to get up from there and move to one of the largest cities in the world, which is Toronto. And I think we were there for 6 months, but it came to a point where we gathered all our documentation, and then my parents decided, okay, we're going to move back for now, because it was getting very tough to adjust. And then we kept on going forward and backwards, I would say, every summer. But in 2007 is when we finally moved to Canada. And just sharing this because I didn't think of this beforehand, but in hindsight now, I feel like a lot of my life has been shaped by so much movement. So being disrupted from one part, living in one country and then moving to another one, in hindsight it doesn't seem that big. And a lot of people I talk to, they're like, oh, you moved to Canada, so I always say grass is not always greener on the other side. So of course it's a better country, but it depends on the individual. For me, it was very difficult to adjust when we moved in 2007. I joined high school straight up, and I have a younger sister. It was very easy for her. I think in general, it was easy for her to adapt. For me, it was very difficult. High school was not the best of the times, I would say. I felt like an outcast coming in to. It's a funny thing, but it was also the first time I was studying with girls. So before, I used to study in a boys-only school. So from grade 6 to grade 10, I was in a boys-only school. And it was always like, oh my God, girls. And then I went there, it was like a different universe for me that, oh, like, how do I interact? How do I talk? I think that kind of guided me into what I noticed in Canada as well. I'm not sure about United States, but in Canada, there's a tendency of people to form groups. So if you're from a certain ethnicity, that is the kind of friends group that you have. So there's not much intermingling happening, apart from if you're playing sports. So even in my school, where it was a primarily dominant white school, but there were groups of people, like there were groups of Asians, group of black kids, group of South Asians, and there was not much intermingling happening. So I got into a group of South Asians as well. Wouldn't have done that in hindsight, but I think that was my safe zone. And some of the I was also very rebellious of my parents. Oh, why did you move me from Pakistan, my friends and my life? And in that rebellion, I kind of started skipping a lot of high school, to the point where my parents had to be called, and they told me, okay, you skipped like 200 days. So if you skip 10 more days, you're going to be removed from the education system. And then I was like, okay, like I need to get out of here, but I need to graduate properly. But that was like a rebellious phase. I think in hindsight it was a bit dumb of me to do it as well. And some of my decisions are reflected of where I am today. Uh, but I think moving between two different cultures was it was a challenge at that moment because it also kind of led me into, I would say at that time, I closed up completely to my family, to my parents. I wouldn't share anything when I was in high school. And I constantly, there was only one thing for me, was this concept of growing up in Pakistan is that your country is everything. So like nationalism is kind of fed to us in schooling through various things, through glorifying the military, through glorifying why the country was born out of this partition. And then we have this sole enemy, I mean, India. This is like very much taught into the system. Just changing now a bit, but moving to Canada for me at that sense was like, okay, I'm betraying that country, or somehow I'm not being or I think now I understand I was losing a sense of myself, or that was changing, that I associated my identity with being a Pakistani very strongly. And it took me a good 4 years from 2007 to 2011 kind of to accept myself as Canadian and understand, okay, what this country is giving me, and how I can give back to it as well.
Did you have any dreams as a kid as to what you wanted to be?
A pilot. I always wanted to be the pilot, either in the Air Force, so I actually tried being in the Air Force as well, or like a commercial pilot. I was always like, I still remember the first time I was going abroad and just standing like against the terminal and seeing the plane land. It's just like, oh my God, what is this flying metal thing that is, landing, and just entering the plane and talking to all the air hostess. Like I was very young, I think 6 years old. But those were like my best memories of first time getting into a plane and then seeing like the pilot with the cap, and sometimes I still see them and I was like, oh, that's my dead dream. I tried getting into it, but at that time I think I kind of backed off in the sense that I could never get into the Air Force because they require 20/20 vision for fighter jets. And for commercial pilots, it was I needed to get an eye operation, so this LASIK or laser surgery. And that time I was very afraid. I was like, what if I go blind? Or like, it's the dumb thoughts. But now I realize that if I didn't push for it that hard, maybe that was not my dream at all. It was just like a fad that I had. But yeah, if I would think of one like big childhood dream was to become a pilot.
Do you mind telling us a little bit about your relationship with your dad and how that relationship felt for you?
Okay. I think now it's great. The relationship is great. I think we're very close. But I think when I was growing up, my dad I still, like, I look up to him. He's one of my, I would say, someone that I feel that if I become like him somewhat, I would achieve a lot. But I think when I was growing up, he was so involved in building his business, and that he was like, he would leave in the morning and come back late at night. So time spent with us was not that much. And I was always afraid of him for some reason whenever I was growing up. And I would rather talk to my mom or my dad's younger brother about anything instead of directly talking to my dad. Although there was never something like, oh, I've never hit, or like, of course I've been scolded at. I've done enough things to be scolded at, but there was always this fear that, okay, I cannot be vulnerable with him. And I think when we moved to Canada, it was like my anger of being detached from my friends or from the country was placed all solely on him, even though it was a family decision at that time. And now I'm super grateful for that decision when I realized the benefits I have. But it was very difficult for me growing up in Canada from 2007, I would say, till like 2016, to have long conversations with him. Like it was to the point where we would have 3-hour car rides, just the two of us, and there would be no conversation. And it was not that he was not trying. He would try, but I would just like shut it out. And there was a lot of things like why we are here, what are we achieving by being here? Because when I was growing up in Pakistan, I would say we come from a upper middle class background, but naturally when you're moving to a new country, a lot of those privileges can be taken away, even though everything was provided to us. But I saw a certain kind of a declining of when you have to, if you go to the mall and you have to think if you can buy something or not, or should I spend money in this, or because if I spend on this, then something else will get affected. That we never had to think about before moving. I'm still grateful for that experience as well. But at that time, I felt that okay, there's something that is not being given to me that I would see all around me, and I also put that blame on him at that time, without even asking him what he was going through. By making such a big move at that age, and then just moving as an immigrant, even though he's like a very educated person, but not finding the proper jobs that he is capable of doing. And then in Pakistan, he was running his own business, and then in Canada, he's doing like part-time jobs just to make sure that the family does not complain. And it's not like anyone else of us was working; it was him. He was the only one who was the sole breadwinner of the family. And I only realized that kind of when I left, I would say in 2015, I moved to Oman for 1 year. And it's weird how you move away from someone and then you start to realize how much of the daily interactions that you have and how valuable they are. And I started to kind of get close to him, like slowly we started to build a relationship anew. But I also started realizing that parents are not perfect, and they're also growing up just like how we are growing up, and they're going through a different stage of life. So yeah, in 2016, I think end of 2016, I was in a conference, and there was a guy from Colombia who was here leading that conference. And at the end of the conference, he shared his story about how he had lost his dad, and how every day he would give anything to just have one conversation with him. And we were talking afterwards, and I shared this about my dad and my relationship with my dad, and he basically told me, dude, your dad is alive, mine is not. I think in that moment I just broke down completely. I guess it was all those feelings of years that were bottled up. And then I called him, I think it was like very early, like 12 a.m. We're in Pakistan. I called him and then we started talking. And it was like a very genuine conversation in terms of a lot of misunderstandings, a lot of assumptions. And I also realized that we have a lot of assumptions that we kind of place on people, and we build a certain image of someone, and then we just believe it, even though there's nothing like that. So there was still some tough conversations to have in terms of why certain things happened, why we moved, why we were not doing as well as we could have. But in the end, it was only that was the pivotal moment of understanding from someone that they don't have access to that individual in their life anymore, and you still do. So what are you doing about it?
What about your relationship with your mom and how that relationship felt?
Yeah, that's great. I think my mom has been, I always tell people that I was raised in a family of very strong women. And I mean by strong, not just that they were working women, but strong in the sense that when they would speak, the men would just, not talk. At times, from my grandmothers, my aunts, and my mom has been, like, I think the moment I was born, she's been working. She was working in Pakistan with autistic children. And she has been a very strong, very, very strong role model for me when it comes how to interact with women, how to respect women, how to be a better man. At the same time, she's also taught me how not to judge people based on ethnicity or religion. I have a diary that I carry with myself. So the first time when I was leaving in 2015, I asked my parents to write letters in it for me. So that was very cliche, but I had to ask them to write letters for me. And then I was like, I will read it on the plane, so I will not read it when I'm with you. And then when I was on the plane, I was reading, and of course there was like, good luck on your journey, and I hope you bring happiness to wherever you go. And in the end, my mom wrote, remember, humanity is the only religion, and nothing comes above that. So I was always brought up with that sense that religion is a very personal belief which cannot be imposed on anyone. So if I'm living and I'm practicing religion, I should not expect someone else will do it as the same thing, as same as me. If they're Muslim, they're Christian, they're Hindu, Jews, whatever. But trying to understand the person behind all of that first. I think my mom has a huge, I would say both my parents, because they kind of were always in this global mindset. Kind of taught me to not be afraid of people, even though when I was growing up, I would still say like the society is afraid of people who they don't understand, especially other religions, other skin colors. And so for me, now in the long run, I understood, okay, why I was brought up with those feelings, like from the beginning, that you don't discriminate based on color, you don't judge people just because they follow a certain religion, you don't stereotype them. I'm not saying it's perfect, I'm not saying that I don't judge people at all, but that kind of gave me a strong base to be very open when I meet people. And I wholly give this credit to her in terms of just putting this in us from beginning. Even though she didn't travel that much when she was growing up, I would say. Like, she was living in a village with my grandparents, and then they moved to a bigger city. On the other hand, my dad traveled a lot. But she still had this mindset of accepting people for who they are. When I was growing up, I kind of sidestepped the question there, but when I was growing up, I think when I was in my teenage years, my relationship with my mom kind of detached a bit. And that too was, I think half of it was just my teenage mindset. What I'm doing outside of home, I shouldn't share at home. The other half was just this detachment that, okay, you don't understand what I'm going through or what my experience is, so I will not share with you. Which was, it was not a very kind thing to do, I would say. And it kind of built up to the point where it was just going to school, coming back home, just chilling, but not talking anything serious or not really sharing how you feel. It was, when I started school in Canada, there was a constant year where I was bullied by a group of kids. And for me at that time, coming from a very different country, it's not like I didn't speak the language, but I kind of bottled that in. And for me, it was like, oh, if I snitch, I cannot do that. And that was the reason for why I was also skipping classes, that I didn't feel comfortable in the school. And I still remember my parents like sitting me down and asking me, what is wrong, what is wrong, what is wrong? And it would just not come out of my mouth that, oh, I'm being bullied. And a part of me was like, oh, they won't understand because they haven't gone through this system, so they won't understand. But now in hindsight, if I had shared, I think my high school would have been much better, I would say, in the hindsight. If I shared with my parents or with my guidance counselors or anyone. I have nothing against those people. I guess they kind of made me stronger. I realized more, but I think the relationship is kind of developing still. Recently they were here, my parents, after 2 years. I met them after 2 years, and I realized that it's very interesting how my perspective of them has shifted from how I was in my teens, in my 20s, and now in my 30s. That now I feel I can have much more different conversations with them. And any kind of conversation is also possible, but I can better understand their perspectives of things, or why we moved to Canada, or why they made certain decisions regarding our future, when at that moment for me that sounded like completely, oh, we don't need to move, or we don't need to do this, or I don't need to go to this university. And now I felt kind of also understood that as they're getting older, they're kind of becoming more childlike in the sense of their inquisitivity or looking at new things and oh my god, how do people do this? And it's very interesting to me, like how time passes so fast. Sorry, I kind of went on a tangent.
It's good. Thank you for sharing that. Could you tell us about your first love and how that felt? It's whatever you associate as your first love. So it could be a person, it could be a place, it could be a hobby.
First love. I mean, it is a person for me. Uh, I think the first time I was actually in love was when I was I went on exchange in 2013 to Bahrain, which is a very small island in the Middle East. And with me, there were like 50 other people in this program. So there were people from all over the world, from the US, from Netherlands, Germany, Arab countries. But there was this one girl, like the moment I saw her, I was like, oh shit. There's like, I just saw her and I'm like, wow, okay. And then she was part of the program as well. And we were meeting a lot, we were spending a lot of time together. Just to get to know each other. And I think that was also at that moment was the first person that I could talk about anything. I still remember like countless hours just talking about life, being very vulnerable, about our fears, what we want from life, what we want from someone else. It got to a point where I was only spending time with her, and some of my friends, they were like, you need to slow down, because the program was 6 weeks. Mm-hmm. So that person is going to leave in 6 weeks. And she lives in Netherlands and you live in Canada. So, and you're a student. So you're very broke. So you're not going to be flying to Netherlands to meet her. But I felt like in that moment, I know in myself, like if I'm committed to something, I'm giving my 100%. And the thinking kind of left my brain. I think I was just thinking from my heart. It was like, I haven't felt like that since that time, and since 2013. It just honestly knowing when, like, you would wake up and then you just like that's the person you think of, and whatever you want to talk, that's the person you go to. But it was like it ended in a massive heartbreak. It was very painful because at the moment I didn't know. Afterwards, I realized that she was taking a break from a very long-term relationship, which I got to know 4 weeks in by a friend. But I did ask her, and she said, yeah, we were together, but now I'm separated with that person. But she had been in a relationship for around 8 years. So I was like, well, now she's not. My mind was like, okay, but this is fine. This is fine. The room is burning, but this is fine. And
can you describe more how it felt for you? So you said you haven't felt that way since then. How were more of those feelings in that moment?
I think it's a certain kind of numbness from pain, it's very like it's very cliche, very romantic, but it's like you're floating. It's like everything is in your grasps, kind of, in a way. And it's like, it's also like a disbelief of a kind of, this person is with me. There's also a lot of fear or insecurity of losing that relationship or that person. What would happen if this would happen? What would happen if this will happen? But I think that relationship was so pure in my mind that there was no judgments. So for me, it's like when you're in love, again, it could be any kind of love with any individual or person. But if there's a space for judgmentless conversation and just openly talking about your fears, your dreams, even doing stupid things together, but knowing that someone has your back, kind of, and not shying away from saying what you feel. Yeah, I would say those were the feelings. But it's also very painful when finally the breakup thing happened, and I realized, like, she went before me to Netherlands. I was still there, and I realized I was very obsessed because I was like distraught. Mm-hmm. Like I was crying about I was not taking part in different activities, and people were like, "Oh my God, you're in love," and I don't regret any of that. I think I was just, it was a good coping mechanism for myself at that point as well. But then when she went back, then I realized like we had a conversation and she just got back with the same person again. And there's a thought that comes to your mind that, I should just close off. Like, I shouldn't be this open and this shouldn't be this vulnerable with people. But I feel like that experience kind of showed me the more if I want to find that kind of feeling or emotion again, I need to be as open as possible without the fear of hurt. Because I also learned that I cannot control love. Like, it's not something you can put in a cage. That's not love.
Can you tell us about your first loss or heartbreak? And it's the same thing, whatever you associate as your first loss or heartbreak and how that felt.
I think my first loss is definitely when my grandfather passed away, my dad's father. It was before that I had never really felt death in that intimate way. And it was also doubly hard in the way that I was not there because we were in Canada. And I still remember I knew he was sick because he had cancer and it had resurfaced even after going through a lot of chemo. And the doctors had pretty much said it's like 5 to 6 months. And my dad was not there, he was back with his father. And I was doing summer school at that day. And I remember coming back and I noticed something was off when my mom was not looking me directly in the eyes. And then she was like, oh, let's just eat lunch. And I still remember just sitting and eating lunch and she just saying, oh, he passed away. Like, she was like, I need to tell you something, and he passed away. And I honestly, at that point, I didn't feel, I did not think that I was so attached with him. But in the moment that I got to know that that person is no longer available in the world, I think that was very painful. It also showed me like, okay, so it also showed me that in my life at that moment, I was not valuing the people that were there. I was taking them for granted. And by granted, I mean not calling, not checking in, not spending enough time when I had the opportunity of asking him about his life and like that generation that grew up in the 1920s and what that world was like. So it is a regret, I would say. But that was like, I would say, the first proper real feeling of not being able to control it as well. So I was also in this mindset that, I can do whatever I want in the world. Some of the things I still believe in that sense for my personal life, but I've understood that that is not something that we can control. It is just not there. And when your time is there, it's your time. And that was kind of hard to grasp at that time.
Who would you say first taught you love and how?
I think it's my mother. And I feel like there's a scientific answer for this, that I was learning it from the moment I was in her womb. But it's also, I've always noticed that mothers are very protective of children. And for me, it was like since the beginning that it's overpouring of love, I would say. At certain times, I don't think I deserved it. But it was still there in the sense that being there for every step of your life. So first day of school, first day of picking up from school, or coming up and coming back in grade 1 and saying, oh, I like this girl and what should I do about it? But then also learning, okay, it's how life is in that age. But also just showing, I would say, how much she kind of poured into her work when she was working with these differently abled kids, and the amount of time and the amount of emotional, I would say how much emotion, I don't know the word, emotional feedback, no. How much emotion she was pouring into it. Like I would go, and she would purposefully take us to the school with us, just to see those children and people who are autistic, people who are deaf, people who are blind, and what their life is, and then seeing how much those children kind of valued spending time with her. I think that is also one of the things that I really learned from her, of kind of giving it selflessly. Yeah, of course, it's a paid job, but taking care of someone basically from morning till afternoon, of all their needs, and then teaching them, and then being very actively involved in community management, talking to their parents, talking about what they're going to do in schools, in summer schools, talking about what can be done to improve the conditions for their homes. Because in Pakistan, it's very difficult for these kind of kids. There's not much support in society, I would say, especially if you're in lower income families, because they are not really seen as providing for the family. I'm not saying that the state also doesn't really provide much for them in that sense. But for me, it was just always being very kind and having empathy for everyone, whoever it is. At the same time, knowing also where to draw the line, but having this empathy and listening to people with open hearts, uh, and being there for people selflessly, just to not kind of care what you're going to get in return.
How do you define love?
I would define love as, again, not, it's difficult to do or believe, but not coming from a place of selfishness, because it's just, I don't think that is love. If you love someone or something, and however or you kind of define love, it has to be free from control. It needs to be free flowing, and it can take you wherever you let it take you. And it's very difficult to just letting it go, I would say. At the same time, I feel it's also something that is developed over time, that you need to pour into. You cannot be that, oh, I love this or I love this person, but you're also not taking an active effort to show that through your actions. So it could be there naturally, but it's something that you need to completely let go of from yourself. I don't think in love there can be an I, or ego cannot be there.
What's a good day look like for you?
Good day is just getting up, getting my coffee, sitting down, journaling, 20 minutes, something like that, listening to some good music, and writing. I love writing as well. So writing, journaling, working on my kind of blog, on my own personal stories that I like to share. Meeting my friends, spending time with family, bringing moments of joy. Also having hard conversations. I think that is very important. And it's funny I didn't mention work at all, but yeah, and developing myself, reading. But most importantly for me is just hanging out with friends and family, making sure that it's utmost importance for me. That like a good day would not be a good day if I'm not meeting with people. For me, my energy kind of drains if I'm not meeting with people. I'm not saying every minute of my life, but I gather a lot of energy just by talking with people and spending time with people. So yeah, coffee is a must though in the morning.
What about a bad day? And how do you get through those bad days?
Bad days are tough, I would say. I had a series of bad days in terms of how I get through them now. When I moved back to Canada in 2017 from Poland, I think my mental health took a huge toll because I was I was coming back to a city, to a university that I pretty much didn't know anyone at that point because I was out for 3-4 years. And I just felt that I cannot connect with anyone. Also, there was a sense of shame at that point in me that everyone that I knew in my batch has graduated, and I still haven't. Even though, in hindsight, I would say I was traveling the world, I met some of my best friends, closest friends through that travel and learned so much. But in that moment, for me, it was like, okay, I'm studying with 20 years olds, like again in first year courses, second year, third year courses, but for what? And there were very difficult times of me kind of looking myself in the mirror, I would say, and feeling proud of myself. Uh, so yeah, there were days where I would not get out of the bed. I would just be like a bad day for me is just you wake up and you're like, what is this? Like fuck it, basically. And you just stay in the bed and you just drag out, overthink. And I was not asking for help as well. It, I have some guardian angels, I would say, that I would thank in my life that were just God sent for me. And one of them is this one. I had a teaching assistant in one of my courses. And one of the days, I think she was noticing it day by day, every week. I was not doing my homework or like assignments in class. I was not taking actively part in classes. I would just go there, attend, and just leave. And one day she just pulled me aside and she's like, "What's wrong?" And I was like, on a defensive, I was like, "No, nothing is wrong." And she basically said, like, "Cut this bullshit and you need to go to a therapist. There's a therapist on." She didn't ask me any other questions. She's like, "You need to cut this bullshit and you need to go to the therapist on campus." I was like, "Oh shit, you caught me." And then she made sure that I took an appointment. And I'm grateful for that moment, even though I didn't really like that therapist, but I still went. It was interesting. I think it was like it's for me therapy is like a soundboard. So you're just saying, and someone is like, okay, and then they're asking more deeper questions to you. Although that's just at that time that was my understanding of therapy. And okay, I cut out an important event that took place before this therapy thing happened. And when I realized in my university, there's like the subway runs through the university. And I remember one day I was like, I would just aimlessly get out. Like I would leave school, leave classes, and then I would just like wander the campus. And then one day I was like, okay, let's go to the city. So I was standing and I just remember it to the T. Like I was standing and then I was just waiting and then there was the train coming and then there was this thought in my mind that what if? What's the point? And what if it will take a second. And I mean, it was like, this was in milliseconds that I was thinking this and I just took a step back at that moment. I was like, what the hell was that? Like this was just this kind of thought and thankfully the train just passed. But I feel that I realized in that moment, okay, there's something very wrong for me to even think that in that moment. For my body to kind of, or my organism to come up with that feeling. And that was also a step that kind of, it was in the back. I didn't share it with, actually to this day, only 3 people know about this and now I guess, but I didn't share that with my teaching assistant. But that was kind of one of the turning points that I was like, how much do I value my life for me to think that it should be very easy to just give up on it. And then through therapy also I realized more, okay, not to fight everything that comes or every thought that comes, but to sit with it and understand from where it's coming from. Also not to act on it, basically. Like now I can laugh about it. But for me, bad days, coming back to that kind of point, bad days is when I'm unable to get out of bed. And it doesn't start, like the unable to getting out of bed is like the peak of it. But it starts accumulating when your room starts to get dirty and you start leaving things You're like you're not washing your clothes. You're like, oh, I'll do it tomorrow. You're not getting out that much. And you're taking the easy route, kind of, oh, let's eat and sleep, or just watch TV. And how I changed that now is that as soon as I see, also learned through kind of therapy, but now through talking to a lot of people and having a very good mentors, learning not to fight against whatever is coming inside me. That was the hard part for me, that whatever is inside my organism, I kind of learned that maybe it's a part that sometime in my life it shielded me from something, but now there's no use of it. So you need to sit with it, and then you need to do this kind of shadow work, or you need to ask very specific questions to self-development. Why am I thinking this? What is the reason? And then also not bullshitting yourself, because I think the easiest person to lie to is yourself, and it's also the most difficult part, because you always know that you're lying to yourself. And then for me, a key is running. So I run every day. Without it, if I skip 1 or 2 days, it's like it starts building up. And the third thing for me is I pray every day. I'm not the perfect Muslim, so I don't pray 5 times a day, but every morning I have my own way of connecting with God. And that just really grounds my whole day. And it's just very easing. I guess it just lifts everything off me. If I'm I feel a burden, it's gone. I'm like, okay, I've told it, I've said it out loud. It's like therapy with God. But it's like I've said it out loud, I've said everything, and now, okay, I'm not gonna worry about it. So, yeah, but it's easy to just fall into the trap also of being mundane and not doing it. And then it's just one day you wake up and you're not getting out of bed. And then I think that point you need a very strong support system that kind of sees it. And they're like, okay, you need to get out. You need to get out, you need to start moving, start doing small actions, like cleaning your room. So yeah.
What's a person, a place, or an event that shaped you, good or bad? How does it feel when you reflect on that? What's one of the biggest things that shaped you?
This is much harder to think than I thought. Yeah, I think for event, it's probably an event for me, which kind of led me down a very interesting path, was when we were in Canada. There was a time where my mom and my sister had an accident, and it was pretty much a hit and run. And I still remember, I was in this building, and then they announced that, oh, will this person please come out? And I was taken out, and then I just see this ambulances and police cars and everything, and then you're running in the center of the street as your mom, just on the street with paramedics everywhere. And then at that time I was just like, I think you're very overwhelmed, and it's just like, okay, this is it, this is it's very difficult to describe in words. And I mean, there was a lot of support from the paramedics and everyone, and we went to the hospital, and thankfully they're alive. My sister and mom both are fine now. But it was like it made me go. At that time, I felt like my safety was in religion, and I became very religious. I'm not saying being very religious is bad, but for me I found my kind of safety in religion. So in prayers and pretty much going towards the extreme of a religion. And I was shaping up to be a pretty different individual, I would say, because I was like, no, you cannot do this, you cannot do that. While my mom was in recovery, and there it came to a moment where I was like, my sister was going on her prom, and she was wearing this very nice dress, and I was like, oh, you cannot wear this. And then my dad was like, you have no say in that. But I was like, I think that moment they realized, because I was spending a lot of time with myself, or I would be skipping school to go to the mosque, just to pray with very old people. And I think my parents realized, okay, we need to send him back. And it's surprising when I tell people that my parents sent me back to Pakistan to be less religious because my family, like both sides of my family, are, I would say, they're more liberal Muslims. Of course, they follow the religion, but they're not any sense of extreme. Growing up, we were never pressured to do anything. And two of my uncles, like I was sent specifically to them to kind of uh, basically talk about what my beliefs were and why those were my beliefs. And I know one of my uncle is like my mom's younger brother. He researches a lot, so he reads a lot on religion. And every question he asked me, I heard from this person, and then I heard from this person, or I saw in this YouTube video. But none of that could be traced back to any literature. So I think that kind of opened my eyes. Okay, I was just slowly getting brainwashed into believing whatever someone would say sitting on a pulpit. And that moment kind of, when I came back to Canada, then I kind of realized, okay, people from other religion, they're not my enemies, or they're not, even Muslims who are not very religious, I cannot judge them what their relationship with God is. I'm in no place to do that. So that is the point that shaped this belief at that point. Like, I cannot judge someone on what they believe. I don't know what happened to them to shape how they are. And that, I think, transformed me in the sense that is why I was so kind of encouraged and personally to go to different countries to see people who were completely different than me and how they live, and why are there differences between us and how we can break them down. So it kind of shaped me in a very strong way. It's funny because I became less religious in essence, but also personally I became more closer to God by just breaking down, not looking at people through religion specifically. But that kind of event is very difficult for me to explain how my mom almost dying took me to religion, but also in the long run kind of took me on another path. Because I still strongly believe that she was saved by a miracle. Like getting hit, and then the doctor was like she can never walk and stuff like that. But of course there was her own willpower. But I wouldn't be the person, I think, if that moment didn't take place. And it's very difficult to say or to accept in such situations that it is happening for a reason. But if that moment hadn't taken place, I don't think I would be here in Poland. Definitely, I think I would be on a very different path. I wouldn't say like I would start, become a very extremist, but I would definitely not be here.
What inspires you?
I think when people talk about something they're very passionate about, and then you just look at their eyes and there's this glee in their eyes, and they're just talking about, they're very deeply talking about, and they just forget that there's anyone else in the room. I think just looking at that, okay, I have a friend who's very passionate about developing people. So he's always going to conferences, is on his own money as well. But when you see why he does it, it kind of fills you with energy as well. Another part, I think, that I feel inspired by, and why I'm in Poland as well, I think that kind of connects with Poland, is that I was here the first time in 2016, and every August 1st, there's 1 minute that the whole city stops, Warsaw completely stops. So there's these sirens that go off, and every tram, every bus, everything, people, if they're walking, everyone stops for a minute. And that was the first time I ever witnessed that anywhere. And they do it because August 1st was when they started this uprising against the German army in 1945. which kind of led to the destruction of the whole city afterwards. So Warsaw is, I think, was like around 80% destroyed. In that moment that I was here, I just felt this weird connection with the city. Of this, okay, so they went through. I'm not saying Warsaw is the only city that has ever been destroyed, but for me, it was just to see how much dark times they've gone through, and that every single person, if you go back enough times in their family, there's someone who was killed, or there was someone who went through some very serious mishappenings during that time, but they still chose to move forward, and they still chose to grow out of it, and they still chose to build the city and build this country. So for me, that was very inspirational, that no matter what hand or what kind of card you're dealt, in the end of the day, it's up to you to what do you do with it. Like, you can be a victim, or you can change that story and you can say, oh, this is happening for me. And again, in that moment, it's very difficult to say that. But there were people who were like, okay, we're not gonna just sit down. Like, they could have easily just not done anything, live under the rule of the Germans. But they didn't just stop to Germans. And then when the Soviets came, they did the same thing. They started this revolution and kicked them out. And they're doing it to this day, like with the current government, when they were banning abortion. So the city was completely like alight for weeks. Like all the streets were full of people just protesting. So I kind of get inspired by this standing up for what is right, no matter what. Yeah, that's it.
What's been a humbling experience for you?
Humbling experience. Well, there has been many. I think the biggest one was, I think the first time I got fired from my job. I think that was and it happened 2 years ago. That the job I moved to Poland for. And it was like, in a short way, it was, I just got into the office and I had a regular call and got on the call. And I just thought of something else, but I was just finished this. And then the manager just came and was like, oh yeah, we're letting you go. Like, just like that. And at that time I was like on my high peak, kind of. I was in a sales role. It was like this, like nothing can touch me, And I was like going, performing, getting better. And it was just like the carpet is taken from underneath your feet, basically. It was a very tough, very, very tough experience. But also kind of taught me that I cannot define myself with the label of my job, because I was doing that. I am still learning to let go of that, of basing my identity on what am I worth materially and what my work is, what my job is. And it was humbling that I am, and also to know the reality that I am not above the company and the bottom line. I'm just there. But the more important humbling experience for me was that when I was in 2015, I was living in Oman for 1 year. And I was supposed to go to a conference in India, but because I'm born in Pakistan, I did not get the visa even though I'm Canadian citizen, because of that whole security relationship. And I remember all my team going, but I was left. And I was like I was getting depressed. I was getting again to this zone of, like, I was being very ungrateful in hindsight. Why me? I should have gone there. I should be the one who should be going there, no one else. And I remember one day just going to this, so in the Middle East, like in the Gulf region, if you're driving there, you can just drive up to a store or a restaurant, you honk and someone comes, takes your order, and then they just bring it to you, pay in the car. So I was going on a car in air conditioning. It was like 45, 46 degrees in the middle of the afternoon. And I remember just parking, honking, and this kid, like I was also a kid at that time, I was 25. But this guy coming who was, I would say, like 18, in 45 degrees, he came, stood outside, took my order, went back in, came out, gave my order, and in that moment, I felt like throughout that whole interaction of 20 minutes, he never stopped smiling. It was like the biggest smile on his face. And I was sitting inside an air-conditioned car, eating food, and then realizing also that this person is probably doesn't go to school. He's just here to provide for his family back home, wherever country he was from, either from Pakistan, India, Nepal. And usually how they live there is like they sleep in shifts. So there are people, for example, in a room of this size will be 20 people living. And then one person comes from work, the other one goes, and they're living like this, and most of the money they're just sending home. And for me in that moment to realize was like, I'm crying over not getting a visa, of not going to a country, while I could be in this person's place. Like where I'm born is probably just pure luck that I'm born in this family and I have all this privilege, which I'm not really utilizing to share or to make the world better. So that was a very humbling experience for me. And Oman in general, there was a moment where we weren't paid for 8 months because it was a student organization. And then we had to kind of, days where we didn't have money to buy a bottle of water, we still had a roof under our head. So we were just paying, like, as the organization, we were the organization in that country. So we were paying for the rent and everything. But we didn't have money for food. So that was also a very humbling experience to kind of, I wouldn't equate it to anyone who is in that situation in the world. I think I was still much more privileged. But then again, knowing this feeling that you cannot buy something, even when you want to buy it, I think that is a very difficult feeling to accept. And then you realize also, okay, so but you also have so many other things. So learning to be grateful and never thinking that you're better than anyone in certain aspects, at least in never putting someone down.
For this next question, if you can go in your mind and think, this life event can be mental, physical, or spiritual, can you tell us about a time in your life that you relate to the word war?
It's funny in hindsight, and I'll tell you why. But growing up in Pakistan, I think we lived a very sheltered life. My family, at least, and in the region that we were, because from 2000, I would say 8ish onwards, not 2008, sorry, since the war in, I would say, Iraq started. So it had a very direct effect on Pakistan because US kind of partially left their kind of gaze from Afghanistan at that point. And then this whole kind of terrorist group started forming in Pakistan at that time. And then from there till I would say 2015, 2016, there were a lot of, pretty much there was a civil war with the military that was fighting in the northwest and in the north with these people. And there was like, I don't think there's a city in Pakistan that didn't have a suicide attack once a month. And then we were sheltered in the sense that we would see that on the news, but we were all living in we never interacted with people who were internally displaced. I never saw the pain of fellow Pakistanis who were going through that thing. I would see it on the TV and stuff like that. But recently when I was living here and then when the day Russia invaded Ukraine, I still remember waking up jaded is a better word, because I have a lot of Ukrainian friends and a very close friend whose girlfriend is Ukrainian, and we're very close. And just waking up and seeing the first message, oh, the war has started. And then the first thing is like, I went and looked out the window. I was like, is there something here? but I was like, oh, okay. Then I realized, okay, it's not here. But it was a very heavy feeling, I would say, because we immediately, all of our friends group, Polish, Ukrainian, everyone knew that, okay, we're going to be there's going to be impact in Poland. Mm-hmm. And I think at that time there was also a lot of hysteria that, that Russia is going to attack NATO and everything. And I think there was a sense of helplessness as well. What can you do? What do we do right now to help what do we do like immediately? And at that moment, you couldn't do anything. Like you can just wait uh, and wait. And then I think a week in, we started seeing. I think one of the things that also makes me very proud or living here of the Polish people is that overnight, it wasn't the governments, like local government, city government, or federal government, but people started all these Facebook groups hosting refugees, taking refugees from the border, donating. So it was all very much community led. That people set up booths on the central station, all the Warsaw stations in different cities. People started driving, like people started taking days off from work. And they're like, okay, we will drive to the border and pick up people and bring them back. Drive to the border, pick up people. And this happened for like 2 months straight, where it was just people who set up their own kind of community-led initiatives. And they were, I don't think there was many people who didn't host people or refugees in their apartments. Regardless of how small their apartment was, someone was hosting someone, either for some days. And then the government started kicking in. And I think for me, it was personally important that I felt that if I'm living here, I need to give back somehow. And then I started volunteering in the central station in Warsaw. And basically, because I don't speak Ukrainian or I don't speak Russian, my job was just working where they were giving out food or directing people. And just looking at, I think it was, I did not anticipate it at first, but there were two very dominant emotions in people that were coming in. And majoritively it was just women and children, because all the men were asked to stay back. It was either very strong, resolute belief that they're gonna go back and that they're not gonna cry, or it was like you would be giving out food in this kind of tent, and there would be like in corners you would start hearing people crying and then just breaking down completely. And that moment you're just, so what the difference I mentioned before of not having interacted with anyone in Pakistan when they were in this refugee internally displaced, and here it was kind of this connect for me, that all these people, some of them might have had plans for tomorrow with their family or for next month or traveling plans or anything, and they just woke up and they need to leave with whatever. And there were people like, they were rich, they were poor, there was everyone sitting together on this table and eating whatever we were giving them to eat. And at the same time, like not letting go of their honor, which was like, for me, it was very amazing to see that they were not like, they were not gathering things. Like if someone was donating something, if you're like, do you need water, do you need something, do you need food? It was only once. And then constantly thanking us. Thank you so much, thank you so much. Even though we were just you're just pouring food. But it's a different thing to see someone who's lost everything and then they break down in front of you. Yeah, that was very hard. Because in that moment, you cannot detach yourself from the war itself. You're not there. But I also know people here who completely kind of, it was very easy to zone yourself out as well. Because the refugees weren't everywhere. They were in a lot of points that only if you went there, you would see them. So if you never went there, your life can go as it was going. And I know people who chose to do that. They were still going out doing their normal things. But I think once you see that, and then you're like it's different to see that from when you're in Canada, and different when you're on the place, like on the ground and meeting these people. And I also realized that geography creates a huge barrier in this kind of empathy. Like during that time, I went to the UK and no one even knew, like in normal day-to-day conversations. Because here, every conversation started with the war and ended with the war, for at least those first 4 months. Wherever you go, it was like, and to be honest, you didn't really felt like doing anything as well. Like it was, how much time can I spend volunteering? I didn't want to meet people. I didn't want to go out to a party or to get a drink, or like you never felt like it. It was as if you're wasting time. This time could be utilized to help someone there, which is a bit unhealthy as well, I would say. And I know we were joking, all of the volunteers, oh, we were gonna need some strong therapy after this, but yeah, it was very amazing to see how people came together and just outpouring of everything, like their empathy, their love, their finances, hosting people. And still we were in a more privileged position than those people that are coming here.
So for this next question, it's the same type of question. If you can go in your mind and think, this life event can be mental, physical, or spiritual, can you tell us about a time in your life that you can relate to the word peace?
The first time that I moved to Poland, so I was with this organization, it's called Isaac, which is a youth leadership organization, and I was in a team of 18 people. We were all living in one house, all students. And why I say peace, because that was the first time that I kind of lived with someone who was from India. And I was growing up in Pakistan at least, and when you grow up in India, both sides is the same kind of thing, that you're very different. There are enemies. We shouldn't, at least this is what the society is, that you shouldn't intermingle, you shouldn't talk with people. And ironically, my team lead is from India at that time, was from India as well, and he was also my roommate. And we started living together, and we realized after a certain, like, we started having very open conversations. Oh, what were you taught about history in school? And what were you taught about our history in school? And we realized both of it is like made up. And then it's like, what do you eat for lunch at home? Or what do I eat for lunch? Oh, that's very similar. What language do you speak? Or we can speak each other's language. What did you do? And like talking from childhood to what was happening in their lives when they were in university. How does religion play a role in their society? How does school play a role in their society? Understanding that we've been kind of taught to hate each other, and there's not many major differences there that kind of differentiate us. But there was a moment like during that time where India and Pakistan they were almost at war, I think in end of 2016, with this line of control on Kashmir. And we were seeing a lot of hatred on Facebook against people, like obscene mental stuff on Twitter, on Facebook, that, we will do this, we will do that. And then one day we were sitting, we were like, why don't we make a video of both of us and we post it to Facebook and see what happens. That we are both living here, and you're from India and you're from Pakistan. And then we had a help of another friend who was a videographer, and we made this video of basically talking about, I'm from Pakistan, he's from India, and we're living here together, and we're really disappointed that the youth from our countries is fighting each other over going to the point that, we will kill XYZ. Like, I think people take this thing very normally, that we will nuke you or we will do this, and they have no idea what that really means. And we kind of put that video out into the world. It was very interesting. Like, it was, there were some death threats, I think, for my friend from India, that he got some messages like, oh, you're an agent for Pakistan. And like, I was getting messages, oh, did you start working for the Indian spy agency? Like but there was an overwhelming support as well, especially from our families, from our friends. And we're like, this is possible. Like, I think that gave us this kind of a hope. Or maybe this is possible, that we are living together, so why cannot everyone live together? I mean, our countries can get better. But like, for me, a moment of peace was that living with this guy from India, and then living in a house where there were There was someone who was an atheist, there was someone who was a very staunch Christian, there was someone who was a very staunch Hindu, there were people who don't believe in anything, Buddhist. And then just meeting them, and then we never really fought over religion. Like, it never even once came up. It was just like, you do your own thing. But there was a lot of inquisitive questioning, of understanding. But it was never from a place of, I would say, evil, so as to say. Yeah, so for me, I would say that was the moment that I realized, like, it is possible for you to, no matter how different that person is, you can still talk to them and understand them. Like, there were a lot of points of contention between me and this friend, and they are till this point in our lives. Like, he's also in Poland, and one of my closest friends, and there are still some points that we would never agree on or see eye to eye. But that does not mean that, I stop talking to him or he stops talking to me. And so as to say, like, I cancel him. I think there should always be a space for conversation. You don't have to be friends, but you can still talk about things. So, yeah, I'm not sure if I answered your question, but
I think you did. Thank you for sharing that. The next question is, if you could just tell us about a truly difficult time in your life, how it felt, and then how you got through it. So just the hardest thing you've been through.
I mean, for me, it's the hardest thing is just this. It was the moment that I like, it's etched into my memory of seeing my mom laying on the asphalt and just bleeding out, and my sister like on the other end of the road, and then it, I also realized in that moment, like, in hindsight, I thought about it then, that at that moment, without my parents, I'm a nobody. Like, I have nothing to my own name. Like, if I'm known, or like that if that, God forbid, if that moment had happened, and then that I would never see my mom or sister again, I think it would have left a massive gaping hole in my life. Yeah, like, it's very difficult to get through things like this, I think. And even though in that moment I kind of became more religious, I think that was more of a coping mechanism for me. And it did help me, in essence, to keep me sane, and not just lose my lose my shit, to get into things like alcohol or drugs or smoking or stuff like that, because I could have very easily done that. And I don't, like, I'm not judgmental of people who fall into those things, because the pain is just so enormous. I think what also helped me was to constantly, it's a bit selfish. Like, in hindsight, I feel like it was also selfish of me. It's always selfish for you to want someone to be there, because in the end of the day, it's for yourself. It's a very difficult thing for me to explain or accept, because it's coming from a place of, oh, if something happens to this person, then I would miss them. So it's never that, oh, they will be in pain. It's like, oh, I would miss them. But yeah, that thought of, I am a nobody without my parents, kind of, I think I added some pressure on myself to do something as well with my life, but also to make sure that I'm spending a lot of time with them, regardless of times when we're having arguments, which is a very natural thing, and we still do. But I think through living apart and realizing that anything can happen at any time, I certainly don't hope for those things, and always look on the positive side, have a positive outlook on life, but making sure that you're always, not always, but you're keeping in touch. Just a message, just a small voice note, just a small conversation, a call. So it kind of shaped me into making sure, to this day, like, all my closest friends as well, and my family, I am always staying in touch with them. Either it be every day, like with my parents is almost every day, but making sure I'm making the time and nothing is either work or my own personal hobbies don't come above the time I spend with my friends and my family, because that time is ending as we talk.
What keeps you up at night?
That's a very deep question. Ooh. I mean, I think there's two things. So the one thing is this constant feeling of what do I want to achieve in this world, or what am I giving out to the world. And it's like a bane of my existence, I would say. And I think all of my friends, the friends group I have, a lot of them are similar. And we realized that it's because that we were in this this not for profit for 4 or 5 years. And then our whole kind of, it was never, during that time we were never paid well, but we were doing work that was very satisfactory for us, and we were like helping people. And now that you're in the corporate world, even though yes, your work is important and everything, but you're never, at least I'm never really like satisfied. Like there's never this contentment. It's like, what are you doing with your life? And it's like a constant loop. So personally, for me, that does keeps me up at night. How, what else can I do to leave the world a better place than what I found it? And the answer I'm still searching, apart from taking time for volunteering or other things. And the other thing that really scares me a lot is that there's a lot of crazy people in power in this world. And they can do like something at any time. And the realization that majority of the population of the world doesn't have any control over that. That any like decisions could be taken for us and we wouldn't even know about them. So that's also very, very interesting for me. Like scary, but also very interesting that you can, how much power a certain individual can have.
What keeps you going every day?
To be the best version of myself every day. I follow this person. I forgot what her name is. She's from the US as well. Meg something. I forgot. She's a TEDx speaker as well. She does this very stupid thing. Like I learned from her a very stupid thing is is to high five yourself in the mirror when you wake up. So if I'm ever feeling down, I go and like, oh, high five. And then it's so dumb that you start laughing. You're like, what am I doing? But it does make you better. Like it like you get better. You're like, okay, I can do this. But it's just, I think self-belief is critically important. And I've always had issues with it, of believing in myself, of achieving something that I've always felt, I can do. But then you do it once you put your mind to it. For me, kind of, I've always wanted, I don't know why, but I always wanted a very shredded body. Like it was like, I was always very conscious of my body before, even though I've never been, I would say, I've never had a lot of significant weight, but I was never happy with it. But then I realized I'm also not doing something. Like I just talk about it. Oh yeah, it would be nice to do this or to improve my stamina. And then I realized, I always believed that motivation comes before action. But now it's like I've switched. I think action comes before motivation. So like with this running thing, I've always liked running. So I kind of conditioned my environment to it now. I know I have to run every day no matter how I feel. So if I start feeling these tricks in my brain that, let's just grab a shake, or ice cream, I slowly start changing. So I will wear the shoes, I will wear my shorts. I would just get ready and then I would sit and I was like, well, now I have to go,
Yeah.
And just setting milestones as well. I think I was never the one to map down my goals. But for me, like it was important to run. I was like, why am I running? So I was like, okay, I will set a goal to run 10K. And then I was like, okay, so July 1st, July 20 something, I will run 10K. And then on that day, I did run 10K. And I was dying by the end of it. Like I ran. But then I was like, throughout that time, even when I was when I was running, my brain was telling me to stop. Oh, maybe we shouldn't do this. Like these tricks of maybe it's not for us or for me. So it's understanding to have a very strong self-belief in achieving whatever you want to achieve, but also then taking action towards it, and not just saying because of this is not happening, or because of that is not happening.
Imagine you're in the hospital today with only hours to live. What would be your regrets, if any?
I not spending enough time with my parents, uh, with my sister, closest friends. In general, I have this philosophy that I don't regret anything, because all the things that I've gone through in life, either very hard or depression or whatever, it kind of led me to where I am today and made me to who I am. There's certain regrets of not spending enough time with certain people in my life, like my grandparents. But for me, the biggest regret would be if I've wronged someone and then not ask for forgiveness. Because also in Islam, it's like God can forgive you for any misdeeds against God, but not against human beings. Like they are the only one who can forgive you. So yeah, if I've ever wronged someone and not asked for forgiveness, that would be a big one. But also not saying things that I want to say to people that I care for and love for, and shying away and saying, oh, I'll say it next time. And I've heard so many people say this, oh, I wanted to say this to that person next time, but then I didn't get the chance to say it. I think that would be very painful regret to have when you're on the bed and you're like, shit.
So you're alive and well. Do you feel that you can be at peace or make amends with the regrets that you just stated moving forward?
Unfortunately, with my grandparents, I can't. That is a pain that comes back and forth. Well, maybe I can believe in Disney and there's stars in the sky and I can just talk to them. But with other things, for sure, I think I'm learning to be more honest with myself and with people who deserve my honesty and whose honesty I deserve. Always knowing and asking for forgiveness where I know that I've wronged someone, and never not shying away from telling someone, that I care for them and I love them and they're important to me in my life.
You told me what your dreams were as a kid. What are your dreams now?
Well, I'm battling that question right now. I think one part of me has this massive dream of I'm very, very interested in having like a very large scale business. Uh, it will be for profit, but at the same time, it will have some aspects of it that are community based. And having I've seen some case studies of companies where each employee is actually an owner of the company in itself, and how the company is it's like a home company for everyone, but it's still a for-profit company. But creating a very large organization I find something very intriguing and very difficult to do. So that the difficulty aspect of it is that which kind of attracts me to it. But other part, the dream is just to live, get like a piece of land and just, have a family and just, live there. Could be. That is when I would decide to move back to Canada, probably in the prairies, the middle of nowhere. I find that kind of something very calm about it. Even though a lot of horror movies kind of I've seen, I don't feel that option is very conducive to me. But that is definitely, that part of me is still there, that why do I need to have a large business? Is it only because I really want to do it for myself, or is it so that I can tell people and feed my ego? Because I can still live a very comfortable life without doing that, and choose to live very normal. I mean, normal is different for everyone, but just have a family or not have a family, but have a regular life and not strive for that push that I'm thinking. But that's kind of connected to what I said before of what your legacy should be when you leave.
Mm-hmm.
So I've kind of realized either it's bad or good that in this world, if you want to make a large impact, you do need to have power. You do need to have a certain access to finance, to kind of, I don't know how to say it, but to kind of make large scale change. I'm not saying it's not possible otherwise, but that's what I feel, or what I've seen so far, is that to make large scale permanent changes, you need to be, that's when people really listen to you. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but that's what I've noticed so far.
You're the co-author of your life story. What's your picture perfect ending? And it's not the end of your life per se. It's just if it was a book or a movie, what is that scenic ending for you?
I think the whole movie would be about struggles and pains.
Mm-hmm.
And the ending would probably be that you're trying to summit this mountain, and then you reach the summit, and when you're there, you look up and you're like, oh shit, there's more to go, but in that moment when you're in the summit, you are at complete peace. So you're realizing, okay, so this was just one part of my journey, and it's not, and all the pains that I went through, everything that happened to me, was all the things that I wanted and I didn't get, all the failures, especially the failures, they were gearing me up and preparing me to climb this next part. So yeah.